Good morning, everybody. We've been asked to give a little personal introduction. For those who do know me, I apologize, you're about to hear some information again, but my name is Chris. I work within the middle and upper school. I have the pleasure of being the Dean of Students in the middle school, which means that I help kids get things right when they often get things wrong. I'm one of the people who helps guide them in that more pastoral capacity. On top of that, I'm the MYP coordinator, which means that I have curriculum responsibility across grades 6 through 10. And under that kind of guise, I also have responsibility for data, which is part of our discussion today. On a personal note, I'm a bit of a nerd, okay? So during my MBA platform, when I was studying for that, my thesis was actually based in how schools could use data and performativity to improve instruction in the classroom, okay? So it's a bit of a personal and professional love. I get that makes me a bit of a geek and a nerd, but I own that, and that's okay.
Okay. That's why I'm here as well, Chris, to join you in the nerdiness. My name's James Ebert. I work in the elementary or primary school. This is my 15th year here at Prague, so I've been here a while at the school. And my role in the school this year has changed. I was a first grade teacher before, but I've also done many other roles. But now what I'm doing is I'm working as the language arts coordinator, which means coordinating the curriculum for language arts and working with teams in that area, but also a learning coach focused on mainly maths and literacy. And so we're working with teams and planning the instruction that happens, looking at all the great data that we're collecting from this and many other places, and being able to plan instruction from there with the club. Okay. So for today, what we really want to do, our goals for this morning is we want to help you develop an understanding of MAP. What does it mean? It's new to a lot of us. Some of us have seen it in other schools. Just so you know, this is new to Chris and I as well. We were coordinating MAP in the different sections, but it was a new test to both of us. Before we had done different assessments in different schools, but we do have teachers on staff, also administrators that have had experience with MAP as well. So they'll be able to jump in at different points as well. But we want to walk you through basically what does the test look like, what do the questions look like for the kids, get an idea of what does it take for the kids when they do this assessment. And then a big part of it as well, we want you to understand how you can use this assessment when you look at that data report. What does that mean for your child? And then as well, we also want to talk a little bit about how as a school we're using the data that we get out of this assessment too, okay? So we want to start with just a little bit of a chance to be engaging because we want to break a little bit. But first of all, we're going to ask you to talk at your tables a little bit. How do you know how your kid is doing at school? How do you know with your kids at home, how are they doing? Yeah, there's lots of different ways. Just at your tables, if you can kind of turn and talk with your groups, what are some of the ways that you know how your kid is doing? Okay? Okay, thank you. It's always interesting to hear the struggle sometimes of understanding how our kids are doing, right? Trying to get the information, trying to understand and how we involve them in that process as well. I heard a lot of working with our kids to see how they're doing things as well to kind of inform ourselves. But we do know school is different than when we went to school, right? Things are different. So it is a struggle for us as parents sometimes to understand.
So we're introducing you to the measures of academic progress testing today, okay, shortened to MAP. And our discussion is primarily going to be based into the three key components that we have chosen that our students will be using, and that is where they will be assessed in reading, in language use, and mathematics. And one of the strengths of this platform is that it is grade 2 through 10 inclusive, which means that we can, across the student's lifetime with us as an institutional provider, we can track their progress and we can see the level of growth that they make across their time with us, okay? We use it as an instructional tool. There's lots of more information, but this is our basic starting point. So the question was, why do we not start MAP testing in grade 1?
So the MAP assessment is banded into categories. So we've got a kindergarten to second grade assessment band. We've got second through fifth grade, 6 through 8, and then there's the 9-10. So there are different bands of assessments that they have, and we've just chosen to start in the second through fifth grade band. So that's why second grade is, we start in second grade and move up because it's a 2 to 5 band. That's the simple answer for that.
Yeah, so we've managed the transition really well, and what we want to really enforce as a messaging from us and from MAP as a whole is actually that the testing that the students complete is actually just one snapshot of performance and growth and data, okay? It's one small component part of their overall holistic growth, and it really helps us as educators improve our instructional practice. When we know exactly where the students are, we can tailor our instructional practice to the benchmark that they're working at and continue to help them move forward, okay? So ultimately, it's one snapshot of many others that we provide as educators across the school as a whole. But as a teacher and as a parent, you will see that there are lots of different data points that you can make reference to. MAP, like we said, is one. But we're aware that Toddle, which has become synonymous for everybody as our learning management system, it's how we share our important information, how our curriculum is developed and outlined. Students can develop evidence of their learning within that platform. They can make portfolios, they can upload their work. So that data capture actually really helps us as individuals and practitioners to be able to give student feedback on where they currently are. On top of that, obviously as teachers, we do assess students within the classroom. That can be a really quick check-in, verbally one-to-one, what we call a formative assessment, okay? Or it can be more structured, a little bit more formal, what's often described as summative assessment. But all of those things are evidence of student learning. Everything collectively combined is what we are looking at, that holistic picture. And MAP, yes, is one component part of that. We often share the students' progress to you as parents through the progress reports, and they will be published tomorrow at 4 p.m., if I remember rightly. Yeah.
For middle school and upper school.
Sorry, for middle school and upper school. I apologize, that's my sectionality coming through there. Yeah. So middle and upper school will come tomorrow. And we often have parent-teacher conferences, learning mixers, student-led conferences. So there's multiple ways and multiple platforms that we hope to share the progress of your children with you, both qualitative and quantitative, both formative and summative, to use teacher language. And these are the different mechanisms that we use to get that information to you, okay?
Do you want to finish it off?
Yeah,
you
sure.
took my bullet?
Sorry, I did. I stole James's point there. So what we'd like you to do is to do another quick turn and talk. We're going to keep this a little bit more curtailed, probably 2 minutes at the most. And we'd like to understand what your testing experiences in education were like. The system that you went through is likely to have been very different to what your kids have just experienced in terms of support, X number of different things. So 2 minutes, just turn and talk. Again, different national systems. Yeah, when you were students, what did you experience?
Okay, so why as a school does ISP do external assessments? So why do we do these? So the difference with MAP compared to all of the other ways that we're assessing your kids during the day is it has an external component that allows us a comparative piece outside of our world here in ISP, right? So we're assessing all the time, like Chris was talking about. We're finding out with kids where they are, what's happening with them, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. MAP gives us a chance to do that, where we can have a comparative piece to outside of ours. What is happening as far as our kids learning in that journey compared to kids outside of ISP? That's the piece that's different. It also gives us that different view. It's objective. A lot of times when teachers are assessing kids, there's a subjective, which means when I'm looking at a kid, I have ideas in my head, whereas MAP is subjective. It's a computer. It's either right or wrong. It's not trying to see, oh, I can see what they were trying to do there. It's not that. And it allows us as teachers in a school to focus on growth, which is one of the other main reasons we did choose to make the switch to MAP, which we're going to talk about. But we really want to focus with our kids on how are they progressing, not just that snapshot of a piece in time, but this will allow us to see over time what kids are doing and how they're developing, so we can take a longer view.
So as we kind of introduced really quickly at the start, the MAP testing is split into 3 different components. There is a reading component, a mathematics component, and a language usage component. We have the ability to run this across grades 2 through 10, but as it states up here, language usage actually starts in grade 3. It is often done in a quite time-constrained fashion, in that it's run over multiple days, but the students have an unlimited amount of time if needed to complete it. So for example, we don't cut the kids off at 55, 65, 70, 80, 90 minutes. I looked at a test while scanning through the results recently, and one student in the middle school took 125 minutes to complete one of the tests, okay? Now that actually really worked to that student's advantage because that candidate needed that additional time and their outcome was really reflective of that, okay? So this is a child who actually has some learning support needs, and by having that additional time, they were able to explore their full level of learning within the testing platform. So that's one thing that's different, as mentioned at the start, from the ISA, and that's a real benefit for our students in particular, okay? Global averages, somewhere in the region of 43 to 45 minutes, depending on the test that's being taken. We try to approximately in the middle and upper school give 1 to 2 class blocks as necessary, and then we've run additional catch-up sessions. So your children have had a maximum amount of time to complete this. They have not been time constrained, as in we've told them they cannot come back to it. They can always come back to their testing, and we've genuinely given them the maximum amount of time. I'm running a session today for certain students who are absent, etc. So we're really working hard to make sure that time does not become an issue.
And just, Chris, on that point as well, the tests that were done for elementary school, they're done in their homeroom classes. So the teacher who's their homeroom teacher did the test with them on their devices in the classroom. Middle and upper school was the same in either their math or their LISS blocks, right?
Yeah, so again, one of the key benefits of moving to MAP is that it's primarily done in the classroom with the teachers. We know that testing anxiety is becoming a more regular component of students' lives, and so therefore by placing it within the classrooms, we're very, very hopeful that it removes that anxiety for the kids. Okay, they're in a familiar environment with a familiar individual, and it removes what I often call, having been experienced across DP exams for a long time, the herd mentality. Okay, it creates a real individual focus for the kids, okay? So how does it actually work? So the students log into the NWEA platform, which is the provider of the MAP testing. Questions appear on their digital device, be that a computer or a tablet. The testing is adaptive, which means it does work to the student's ability level. So it's not a standard test. It gives a next question based upon the student's correct or incorrect answer to what went previously. And what is really, really interesting is that we really reward the students as they are able to get the questions correct, okay? But part of the process is that approximately 50% of the time, so that you understand what the kids are doing, the students are not getting the questions correctly. Okay? So it's not that they're getting a really high score from getting all of the questions correctly. You still get a really high score based on the difficulty of the question at hand. Okay? So it's adaptive to the needs of the kid. It can up the level, it can down the level, it can stay at the middle, it can go whatever direction the computer platform needs it to take. Okay? So it's adaptive based upon how your child responds at that time. So it's personalized. Okay? It's personalized to your child and the responses that they're giving. Okay? There really aren't many other educational platforms that do this. And so, again, real strength of MAP at this time.
So the areas that it looks at. So when these kids sit down to do it, and like we said, there's 3 different tests. So if I sit down, I'm in a second grade classroom, I'm doing the reading test that day, I would sit down, open it on my iPad. These are the areas that it looks at for reading, and then there's a second test also for language use. So that would be done on a separate day, okay? And when it looks for MAP reading and language use, it's looking for vocabulary and word structure. It gives comprehension, and you'll see on your parent report that word lexile. Lexile is a way that texts are gradated to difficulty. So there's a number that goes with it, that is an international standard. Lexiles are something you can use to look at lots of different things, but it gives kind of a reading level that way. There's a word analysis and vocabulary component, literal comprehension, so they have to read things and answer questions to show their understanding. Interpretive comprehension is where they're using their own knowledge to make understanding. Literal response and analysis, and grammar and conventions in language. So basically there's lots of different ways, and we're going to show you some of the questions they do. Okay? In math, it's a separate test again. They sit down to do the math test. What it looks at is number sense and operations, patterns, function, and algebra, measurement, geometry and spatial sense, data analysis, statistics and probability, problem solving. One thing I want to say about the math test in specific, and you're going to see it when you see the questions, there is a English component. It is not often presented just as an algorithm, solve this problem. There's a reading component that goes along with it. For the whole school, we had turned on basically where it's text to speech. It reads the questions if the kids need it as well, but there is an understanding component that goes with that even if the question is read to you. You have to understand what you need to be able to do, and then you would be able to solve the math equations.
Yeah.
Okay?
And by extension of that, our learning support team in particular made sure that any additional accommodations for any students were required in terms of dictionary usage, language, etc. So again, thank you to Amber for making sure that that was completed.
It was a big job across all school.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at some sample questions. We're going to start by looking at reading and language use questions, which are taken out of the MAP practice testing. James is just passing those out to each of the different table groups. So what we are going to ask you to do to start is to just take 2 minutes, have a quick glance at the questions in your group, just read it through, and we'll come back and give further instructions in just 2 minutes, okay? So we are hopeful that you will see that in front of you you have a mixture of question levels that are from the different tests that have been provided. What is useful for you to recognize and know as parents is that if you really want to get to know the platform and system, you actually have the ability to log into the NWEA platform using the username GrowGrow. Okay, and so if you would like, we're going to share obviously the presentation with everybody in the community, but you as a parent do have the ability to log into the platform to practice the sample questions that you have in front of you, and so that your children had opportunities to do this in class, and this is just another mechanism that you can use to help support at home. So the username and password are both GrowGrow, and that gives you access to all the different levels of testing from ES and upwards.
And just so you know, these questions that you're looking at now, they're samples. They are not the questions that were given to your kids. So don't take it home and see if you need to practice these questions so we can get a better score next time. That's not the point. Basically, this is just for you to get an idea. And with the kids, before they actually did the test, they did exactly this. They went in to see what the questions would be like. They had a practice session in each of their classes. They looked at the questions. They saw the tools that are on the top of some of those questions. They saw how to use them so they could practice that before they went in to do the testing. Okay, so how does MAP measure? And this we started to get into a little bit with some of the tables when I was talking to it. So if you are like me, when I had my daughters, as they were growing, I would take them and put them on the wall just like this and make a mark, right? And as they grow, you could see their progress, yeah? MAP does the same thing. But it doesn't do it with centimeters. It uses a score called the RIT score. And on your parent report, you probably saw that number that's called the RIT score, 215, 198, whatever it was. It's on a scale from 100 to 320, okay? So that's kind of the scale of the RIT score. And you see that scale written on the parent report as well. What that's supposed to be able to do is to help you see how your child is growing and developing. Okay, so what we want to see as we look at MAP scores across is we want to see the same thing that we see. We want to see them as they grow across the years. Okay, the reports provide this score for each skill area to determine strengths and areas to improve and an overall score. The teachers see the scores for different areas. So if I'm a third grade math teacher or third grade teacher and I sit down and I want to look at my kids' math, I can see how did they do in geometry, how did they do in operations, how did they do in number sense, spatial reasoning, the different areas. I get different RIT score numbers for that. Okay? The RIT score directly relates to the difficulty of the question. I know Chris said that on some of these there's a level or a grade level assigned at the bottom when you look at the questions. That doesn't mean that at that grade level you would see that question, because that just means the question is associated with a specific RIT score. It might be the year below. If a child is working well above, they might get that question as well. It might be that the year above, if they're needing extra, if they need an easier question, it might give them that question as well. So it really does adapt and go across.
Yeah, so one of, again, the real strengths of MAP as a platform and as a system is that it is grade independent. And what that does is create a very objective baseline of growth that we can measure across your child's progress within the school. It is not grade level dependent, and that's an exceptional thing for us as educators to be able to use.
So like I said, as educators and as parents, you will be able to see this RIT score. It shows that basically level of achievement at a grade level. RIT scores help to inform teachers of what possible next step for students might be. When I'm as a teacher log in and look at a child's RIT score, it gives me ideas of what those questions are about and areas to develop that student's understanding. One important note, RIT scores are only in MAP. If you take that number and say my child is a 250 and go somewhere else that doesn't use MAP, they will have no idea what you're talking about. RIT scores are specific to MAP testing itself. So while it's useful for us to be able to do that measure of growth just like centimeters when we measure our children, it's not something that you can actually use for anything else. It's just basically for us to be able to use as a school to measure the growth of a child. If you move to another school that does use MAP, you can use that RIT score to again continue to see your kids' growth as well, because lots of international schools do use this.
And so what we're trying to do is to really develop the mindset and the culture within the school that MAP is an instructional tool. It is there for us to help teachers and you as parents support students' development and growth, okay? It is not an objective outcome of mastery of a subject area. It is genuinely an instructional tool that allows us to look at specific areas of growth that we can continue to help students move forward with. So it's not a test in determining mastery. Regardless of the outcome of it, there is always growth for every candidate, regardless of how high or low the RIT score may in fact be. So we're going to do a really simple little activity again here. I'm going to lead us through it. We're not going to do a turn and talk on this occasion, but simple show of hands. Who would say that the outcome 225, the orange line, had a better year academically than the blue line? If you agree, put your hand up. Orange had a better year than the blue line.
They know you're trying to trick them. They're on to your games.
Okay. So, leading into the kind of previous statement, what we really recognize is that these are individual outcomes for these kids. This doesn't tell us enough to be able to measure the growth of that child across a period of time. What we actually need to be able to look at is where they started and where they moved to, okay? Their growth, their development, okay? And so whilst the student in orange has a higher RIT score, the growth of the candidate marked by the blue line was greater, okay? So the outcome for the orange line may be higher, that doesn't mean that they displayed the most growth. And that's what we as an institution are really trying to focus on, is the development and the growth of every single learner and their potential to where they can be, okay? It's not just an objective outcome, you got the highest score, that makes it the best. That's not what we're about as an educational institution in terms of our philosophy and what we stand for. So as we collect these data sets, okay, what the teacher and shared with you as parents in a slightly different format can see over a period of time is the development of a student. And this is a new joined student this academic year. This student joined us from a previous school that did use the MAP testing, so we had the ability to look at their previous outcomes. And what you can really clearly see is that the student is in the 61st to 80th percentile across all candidates sitting this assessment, and that they have gradually developed from the spring of 22 to the spring of 24 from an approximate score of 235 up to 244. They have shown growth and development, okay? So that is roughly what the teacher sees on a period of time, and that's a previous student that did join this school. That's the MAP outcome from them. Your family report will show the same thing over a period of time. But at this stage, because we only have the one data set, it actually looks more akin to this, okay? Because we are moving forward. In the spring, we'll have data set 2, autumn next year, data set 3. So you'll start to see the trends and the lines in that component. But at this point, we actually only have one data point, okay? So your reports will look more akin to this. One important note is that it does present percentiles, and what that means is normed against the previous data set that it uses, which is back in 2020. So the data set is every 5 years approximately. This student achieved in the 64th percentile, and that would be classified as a high level of achievement, okay?
What group is that compared to?
So it's a international body, actually, that is used every 5 years approximately. It includes the majority of schools that test MAP worldwide. But again, one thing to be aware of, MAP testing is skewed to the US because it is used within the US public and state sectors. So in terms of numerical outcomes, the national average that is often shown in the report is skewed to the US. As a benchmarking body. So that's, again, all different testing mechanisms have different positives and negatives, and that gives us a wider testing body, but it doesn't necessarily always reflect exactly us versus the International School of Brno. There are ways that we as an institution can manipulate that. We can export those reports through different groupings of schools, so we can compare against CISA, for example, etc., and that will be things that we do moving forward. But in this first data set, this is what you as a parent see. Okay? And every 5 years, the norming takes place, so the averages that are presented change, and so in 2025, the next data set will be loaded in, and that will be the next set that is then used for the following 5 years. Okay?
But it's compared to US.
It's not only US
Not
schools,
only.
but it is majority. If you think about the millions of kids that sit MAP testing, it is heavily used in the US. So they are the largest group within that norming group by a long shot. So we have a way of, like Chris said, to be able to say, okay, let's look at just CISA schools and compare how they did in reading or in math. And we can see those numbers as a CISA school looking at different grade levels, but we can't do it on an individual level. Do you know if that makes sense to you? So I can't take a specific kid and be able to look at it compared to CISA schools other than by hand, by ourselves. It's the Central Eastern European School Association, and it includes schools like Warsaw, it includes Budapest, Bucharest, all of these schools that come for our sports tournaments as well. Some of them are part of CISA too. So that's the organization that we are a part of. But we can also pull up, if we want to look at the Asian school international school system and be able to take a look at that. Or we could look at the South American international school section and be able to pull up that data and see it and compare ourselves to those things as well.
And very interestingly, just a final point there, in terms of CISA, my understanding through Dr. Calloway is that we are the last school in CISA to transition across to using MAP testing. So it now does give us a benchmark across other schools in our region that we will use moving forward. Hi.
Yeah, I would be interested in what is ISP approach in terms of interpreting the results. If you see the average, like let's say, okay, ISP students are above the average as shown, if we know that most of the students being tested are from the US. Like, do you take that into account, or would you say like, okay, we're good in math because we are slightly above the average, or is that way more differentiated? Because we're in Europe, we need to compare to the international schools, and we cannot take the US average as our benchmark. So how is
ISP using it?
Yes.
Yeah, and I would say it in several ways, right? So we'll get back to the Ferret report in a second, but basically we're using it, and we're going to talk about this with teams as teachers as we're looking at how kids we can help them to move forward, which is independent of where they fall, basically. So we want to see how do we help them to keep growing wherever they are in that scale. As an international school, we have a very mixed population, and we test everybody who is capable of doing the test, and that shows up in our results. We do look for our kids to do better than what would be that 50% of the norm, right? That we want our kids to be above that. Of course, we know in individual cases that that's not where they're going to be. What's more useful for us is also when we see differences from what we see in the classroom, from what we see on this test. And then we have to take into account, well, this was one sitting. What does that data tell us? How does that help us to work with that child? Yeah? I don't know, did you want to add anything?
I would just say that the point that this is growth, right? This whole test is about growth as opposed to comparison between either your kid and another kid or our school and another school. That data comes out as well. That's super useful data. But the whole point of this test is a progress test, so we can see how each individual kid can go from wherever they started to wherever they end, and we want to maximize that, right? And it doesn't matter if they started at the bottom or they started at the top, we want to maximize their growth. And so how that your child is doing against another kid, just on the pure numbers, it's interesting, right? I mean, we all feel good when our kid's doing a bit better, right? Especially than our neighbors. Right, But at the end of the day, what we're concerned about is, A, the information this is giving us about your individual child that they individually need to do better in math and reading. And, when we take this test at the end of the year and for the following years, the growth and maximizing that, right? So, kind of like we showed you that picture, when, if your child's doing really great, whatever that means, and they just increase a little bit, well, we're not that impressed, right? Then your child has been coasting and they haven't got the growth that we would expect. And we will push that growth as much as we can, regardless of where they are, whether they're below another school or above another school or above grade or below grade. We want to maximize the growth. That's what we want.
So are you able to drill down and see the types of questions that
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have a teacher interactive data dashboard in which we can drill into almost everything. We can output on terms of the question type that the student struggled with across the board and a grade. We can look at all those different things. So how it was broken down in terms of the different testing components, we can output that. We can look at time spent on it. Did they spend enough time? Did they rush? All those different things, yes, we can see all of that within our data dashboard. And just today we started our meta level dive actually in the middle school and the upper school looking at this. And then gradually over the next 4 weeks, the teams will really digest and dig into key issues like that. Yeah.
Yep. All right, so basically your report was just this part right now, and you notice there was a blank box on the other side in the growth. When you do this test again, and your child does it, and you get the report, this is where we get excited. We want to be able to see the growth we've been talking about. That's what's coming up. So you'll start to see that line, how it moves for your child, and it will show multiple times through the year that they do that, and it goes from the year previous as well, so you'll see that on there as well to be able to see the growth. And then what you'll have here is you'll have basically how is your child's growth, and then this can be a little bit tricky, so I want to make sure I explain it, because it again gives you a percentile. So just like before, you talked about your child, this child is the 84th percentile, great. But this growth percentile is 96. That's even more exciting. Mm-hmm. That means that this child grew better than what we expected them to be able to do. Because in that norm group that they had before, when we talked about how they come up with that percentage, they don't just look at where the child is, they also look at what the child's growth from that point will be. What's the expected growth, the projected growth? And then they're able to say, this child did more than they thought they were going to grow. So the growth was greater than expected. So if a child has a high growth, that is where we're most excited, when we see them growing and progressing like that. One thing to be aware of, and I know we're going to bring it up later, is there are times, right? Just like when we measure against a wall, where that growth is not what we expect. Yeah, and it's something that we always are working on with the kids, but it's something we know happens as well. Yeah, and so this percentile, when we talk about growth, is that important factor that we're looking for. We're looking to see that kids are making exceptional growth. That's what we want to focus on.
All of the kids taking the same test, like let's say 5th grade, every 5th grader has the same exact test?
No. So what happens, exactly, it's dynamic. It changes based off of how they do on the questions, exactly. And that RIT score, that number, what it relates to is it relates to the questions, and it's trying to find where the kid would 50% of the time get a question in that area wrong, 50% of the time get a question right at that specific level of RIT. Yeah, yes? The RIT score is standardized. Mm-hmm. That's why it's in that normed group. Mm-hmm. They always adjust it. So it's standardized in that norm group, like Chris said, from the 2020.
Across the whole cohort?
The whole what, sorry?
The whole group.
Yes, all ages, all ages. And that's why, just like when you measure with centimeters, that doesn't change as they get older. The RIT score doesn't change when they get older either. They're always on the same scale, always on the same scale. Yes?
Yes, just a question. It's always good to know how is the neighbor. Is it possible?
Do you want to talk to Kat?
Is it possible to get average of, like, for example, our grade level in this school, and then to compare our child? We can compare individually, of course.
Yeah, Cal, do you want to share if there's plans to do that?
I think we got all of our data. So the couple of things to say. The test has changed in last summer. They did the big overhaul of the changes. So I've worked with this test plus minus for 15, 16 years or whatever. And they update how it looks and make it smarter and colorful and more stuff. And they've just done an update over last summer. And so, for example, one of the questions people had is, okay, this national average, is this against American schools? Can we also see against CESA schools or whatever schools? And so we're going to look into that. Certainly at some point in the past, I remember seeing other things on there as well, but they've changed it. So we have to check if that change means that we can get it, we can't get it. So we're going to look into that and see what we can do. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we got this all school data we just got this week, right? So there's a little bit of what are they going to share with us and what we can see and so on and so forth. So I think we can see a lot of stuff about all of the grades and what we can put onto this thing for you. Maybe that will change when we know what we can turn on, what we can't turn on, and what we can see.
Probably you can give us like average for our grade in this school and
maybe, but here's the thing, we come back to this. How everybody else is doing is really irrelevant to this whole question, right? Because it really is about your child and how your child is growing. So if you happen to be a kid in the class who was the bottom of the class, right? And everybody else is significantly above you, how does that mean you're doing? It doesn't actually mean anything at all. So what it will show, in that case, what it will show is you are in the bottom 5 percentile of the class, right? So as a parent, you feel pretty unhappy that your child was below everybody else, right? But in reality, what it could mean, and I'll change the numbers to be really simple, is that everyone else in the class got 97, right, in a test, and your kid got 96. But you are now displayed as the bottom 5% of that class, or whatever the statistical thing is, right? Because that's statistics, right? How much does it really show us? Right? What we want to know is how much they grew. Okay, we know that. But also, when you start comparing, what are you actually comparing? If your kid got 96, he's not actually behind everybody else. But on the comparison chart, they're gonna end up 27 out of 27 kids, and bottom statistics. So yeah.
Okay. One more question. Hi.
I have a question. So I like it better now. Which level my child is in the grade, because the previous test was showing us where is my child on the level of the
grade level average. Yeah.
Yeah. So from this test, I don't know it.
The percentile is the grade level. So if it says 84th percentile, that is meaning if your child's in 10th grade, they are performing at or better than 84% of 10th graders that took this. So the percentile is grade specific on this report.
Just approximately, if you're familiar with bell curves, right? So basically, most people are at 50%. That's the average, right? So if you have a number which is above 50, right, then your child is performing above average compared to the group that they are being compared against on a bell curve, right? So again, these things are quite approximate, but if just using this right now and knowing those things you just told you, if you are 65, 75, then you are above average, just to be very broad, and if you are on the other side, you are below average. But again, the averages depend on statistics, and so that's...
But it was more clear, like the previous test, because you see the grade level and then you see like from the result that it's okay, like it's still on the grade, or it's lower or it's higher.
Yeah. But I would also stress the other thing which Mr. McClellan brought up at the beginning, which is that this is one data point, right? This is one thing which is super useful for us to give us all this information, but it is also one data point. So if you really have a question about how your kid's doing, rather than engage in statistical analysis, right, which involves a lot of coffee, the simplest thing to do is just meet with your teacher and be like, how is my kid doing? I've got this test score, it says he's really struggling, but how is he doing? So just reading his math is a great conversation to have with the teacher. And also, Mr. Principal, Juhas over there, Dr. Juhas, recently doctorized. Your child might be scoring a 5 or a 6 in their school grades, but this might show that they're actually below that. So what does that mean? That means they're working really hard, right? Their ability is at this level, but they're actually managing to perform and do things in class which are at this level. And so there's different perspectives and viewpoints of how you manage kids and what they're doing. So anyway, I'll let these guys.
Yeah. I'll add those conversations that the teachers are having, we can have them right now. Whereas last year we had to wait a few months to have those conversations. So this is really exciting for us. And this morning we were able to have these conversations where teachers were realizing, and noticing where their students are on this measure and thinking about the reports that they just completed test, which will be available tomorrow. And doing a comparison of how they're doing in the classroom and what the MAP data is showing. And the other thing that we're also seeing is the approaches to learning skills, the learning habits that kids have. So there's another student who performed quite high, but also isn't performing so well in the classroom. How can we support their learning habits so that they can actually achieve at higher levels what their MAP test scores are showing? So this is really, really helpful to us in being responsive to our goals.
Okay, so as Michelle just said, and Dr. Wise, basically, how do we use MAP data as a school? And this is what's happening now. Sections use MAP data as a tool to measure student growth in conjunction with all of that other internal data that we have. And it's that comparison of what do we see from this MAP, one sitting, one test, compared to what are we seeing with the kids across the time that we've been with them and all the other assessments that we've done. And what's happening right now in like the ES, we've had team meetings at all of the grade levels where we've looked at the MAP data together for their grade levels. We've seen as a cohort, like all of the grade level as a whole, how are kids falling, what's the differences, and how we can support them. Teachers are then digging into the individuals, looking at individual scores to see what are next steps for individuals of kids as well. Okay. MAP helps inform our decision-making and instructional practices at that grade level, but also as a school. It's a way for us to track, especially when we get that growth piece, how are we doing as a school to make sure that our kids do the best that they can. And MAP scores translate to learning statements. So this is what I was talking about when teachers sit down and look into a specific area like geometry. It takes that RIT score of where the kid came out of for geometry, and it says, for geometry, a kid at this RIT score, these are specific areas that they might want to work on and what their next steps are. And so as teachers, we can go in and look at those things and see goals and help our instruction as we plan our units out.
So again, the question might come, and probably has been raised already, why did we switch to MAP and focusing upon student growth? Well, number one, it's a measure of growth. Again, over time, I think we've outlined that quite clearly on a number of occasions. Usability, we get this data within 2 to 3 working days most of the time. Then we have the ability to digest it, work it through with large teams, small teams, and then almost instantly we can change instructional practice in the classroom. So we can know where kids need additional individualized support, or where we can really stretch kids a bit further where perhaps we hadn't been doing so. So that speed in terms of what we're doing. Amber.
I and our department love this assessment as well, this tool, because it actually allows universal access. So I spoke briefly, I hijacked that team over there earlier to talk about a lot of the great universal tools. So that means tools that everyone can use, whether it's being able to expand the page or narrow down to one question, be able to listen to some of the text. I forgot my glasses, so I want to listen, or also the time aspect of this. Everyone has a universal little toolbar, and part of our job that James spoke about earlier was that we went into every class from grade 2 to 10, and we supported the students on how to learn to use that little toolbox. And we want that also to reflect in our teaching. So this was actually a really good insight of what we're doing in the class to meet all students' needs, and how this test actually fits our philosophy and our vision of how we want to be teaching at ISP. So we were thrilled to help support this.
Yeah. And just a note on that part about usability before we go to the next one. So if you've been at the school for a while, you know we've done ISAs, the International School Assessment, which did give us good data, but the main issue we had with it is you would do that test in February, the kids would do it, it was sent off. Teachers, parents did not see those results until almost the end of the year. So the biggest issue we had with was basically, okay, as a school we can use that data to help us think, but it didn't help the kids in the classroom. It wasn't something that we were able to use to tailor instruction to help that growth that we're talking about.
Yeah, and again, final reason, we did mention before that we are the final school within the CISA group, and so we have some models there. Yes, questions back.
I'm sure you did as a school, but do you also reflect the test with the students? Like, do you ask them, like, how did you find it? Where were difficulties for you personally? Because, for example, my children, they came home with a very profound opinion about the test, and they said, oh, I really didn't understand this. I did well in that. So do you do that in the class to get an idea of like, what do they struggle with?
Yes, and that's an ongoing, it's an ongoing conversation with those kids, not just from MAP, but from everything they do. But definitely after the MAP testing, there was conversations in the classroom around how the test was for them and areas, and it's actually what we're going to be sharing as well when we talk about it.
What we're really curious about right now is student persistence post-pandemic, is that the persistence of students is a little less than it used to be. And so this does give us, the questions put kids in the zone of proximal development, just right zone of some questions being right and some questions being wrong. And so they're challenged in a really different way that for some kids feels exciting and for some kids is really difficult. And so now that we have this baseline data, I think it will be different. We'll see the second time they do it, they'll become more familiar with that feeling. And this time for some of our kids, it was a little hard.
Yeah, I understand, but I wanted to know, like, because I told my kids, I said, tell your teacher, if you didn't understand this grammar term, maybe it's useful to tell your teacher so that the teacher, so this is what I was after, because there's probably specific things and you can all try to guess in the test as well. So, but probably you haven't understood, so especially for middle school, I mean, is it like a reflecting process that you ask the students, okay, were there any terms you didn't understand? Did you know what to do when you were asked the grammar question, etc.?
I can speak to that. I'm in multiple sections, and yes, those conversations definitely have started. I heard grade 10s having conversations about it. I had conversations myself in the hallway when a student went, wow, I think I really bombed that. And so I actually explained it, and she'd already figured out kind of how the test would work. So definitely in the classrooms, definitely individual, definitely in grade groups, those conversations are happening. And it's great you encouraged your child to speak directly to your teacher, whether it was content or how they were feeling. We want to know that. So
well, I think he's not doing it. This is why I was like, maybe teachers.
Some of them did come and speak to us. Yeah, some did come.
Okay, I'm just going to keep us moving forward so that we have a little bit more information to share. So just like our IB journey, in which we joined a school network of 5,000 plus MYP schools and 2,500 full continuum schools approximately, by joining the MAP family, if we want to use that phrase, we have 10 million plus students getting tested annually in this mechanism, and we are joining 141 countries globally, okay? So what we need to recognize are a number of different things, okay? As parents, as educators, as teachers, as those involved in the care and welfare of young people overall, is that I'm bringing it back to this, okay? Comparison is something that we like to do as adults, but what we need to focus on is the growth of the child. Okay, as an individual child, how is that child progressing and developing? And realistically, that is not always equitable across every single year. Okay, so there may be some ups, there may be some downs, and then there will probably come out of that trough. Okay, it might be a little bit wavy as we look at the data set. But I'd also kind of draw you back a little bit to where the student had like a 96% level of growth. That kid's RIT score increased by 16 points. That's it. And that was equated to a 96 percentile level of growth. That's exceptional, okay? So what we need to just think about is that they may excel in certain years, and especially at the top end of the school, a small level of increase in RIT score is actually really, really high, statistically significant, okay? We only have one data set at this point. The kids went through it for the very first time. The process was new for them. It was new for the institution as a whole. We will all learn and move forward together. But we do have one data set. Please remember that, okay? It's only one data set of a holistic overview of student progress as a whole. Some students may go down. We've talked about that as well in terms of the wave. And ultimately, bring it back to the individual instruction. If you're concerned about your child's progress, talk to the kid's teacher, okay? This is only one indicator and one mechanism. Your child's welfare and progress, you're aware of that. Please discuss with the teacher directly, okay?
Okay. So anytime we get data or feedback about our kids, whether it's through Toddle, and we see those lovely evaluations in middle school and upper school where they got a 6 or a 5 or a 4 or a 7, we want people to take feedback, our kids and ourselves, from a growth mindset perspective. And what that means is instead of a fixed mindset where we view any data or input that we get as criticism, what's wrong with this part, what we want you to do is think about that part about growth and how can we help support them from wherever they are to be able to move forward. So if we embrace feedback that helps us encourage our learning and helps that growth, that's what we want to do. So with MAP, for you as parents, when you have this MAP conversation with your child, and we would encourage you to sit down with your kids and talk to them about MAP, especially ones who've just currently done it. Sit down, talk to them about how they felt it went, and talk to your child about what do they think are the areas that they need to develop on. Like you were saying about the areas that he said when we went through his test that was difficult, that's a great way to bring up that growth conversation. Oh, what can I do to help you, to support you, to make that better and easier for you? What do you want to do to improve in that area? Okay, so we want to focus on that area of growth. So by talking to our children, using MAP as one point of data, but all the other points as well, how they felt about their day in school, what was hard for them. We're constantly having these conversations about how they can grow. Like we said, talk to your child's teacher about ways you can support it at home. Sometimes kids have the answer and know what they need to do. Sometimes they don't. And that's where you can bring in that third voice of the teacher. You might see things that you're concerned about, have that conversation. What can we do to support that growth? Okay? And I put on my literacy hat for one little bullet point. I will always encourage kids to read, read, read. It is one of the things that research has always shown makes amazing growth and progress in all areas. So no matter what we're worried about, in building that lifelong love of reading is going to help them grow as individuals and learners for the rest of their life.
So we've been taking questions along the way. We're open for questions that are not individual to, again, the outcome of your children within the assessment that's just been taken. So does anybody have any questions that would help for the good of the group as a whole? And I can see a couple of hands up, so we'll just work from front to back then. Sure.
Yes, so when the kids move to another school, is it going to be easy for them to get the data from this school to the next school?
Absolutely. So the MAP progress report can be exported and can be shared. Again, we had X number of students that joined the community on this year in which we have access to their MAP reports. Previously, I looked at one this morning, literally, and it does not transfer within the platform and system. Okay,
because of data privacy.
Because of data privacy between different laws, between different countries, but the report we can give you as a family, and you can give that to the admissions team at the school. So yes, but not through that system. Yeah, second question, hi.
When is the second test this year?
So we're looking at the scheduling of that for mid to late spring. A date has not been decided on, actually, because we need to run it across multiple sections of the school, calendaring in terms of DP exams, calendaring in terms of sports events, external trips. So there's multiple different layers to that, but now that we're through the first session, we want to learn from that, take some feedback from both the faculty and the kids, actually, to learn how we can make it more comfortable and more effective for them. And then within the next, I would say, 2 weeks or so, we will have a confirmed next series of steps.
They recommend approximately week 32 of the school year, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. I've just checked, is May. So somewhere around May is when the next.
And then it takes a couple of weeks to get.
Yeah, so what they do is they give us a window, right? So one big thing that's great about MAP that we can, if you remember the ISAs, we're taking on one day. If your kid was sick, if you're whatever, that's it, you're done. You missed it, it's gone, and timed and everything else. So if you were late to school, you missed half of it, you're done. They give us a window, right? So we have a little bit of flexibility within that window for kids who weren't there that day, but also if they take longer time, and also if we need to just move things because something happens. Right? So generally, we're looking at the beginning of May, but we have this window.
And what we did this time is after the last makeup test day, 7 days after that, we published it to parents. It's kind of our rough timeline, so the teachers have an initial chance to look at the data, so they're ready for your questions.
But based on that, just to be clear, I'm running additional assessments today for students who had serious illness, etc. So they're able to complete it today after school. They're able to complete it on Monday after school. There was additional catch-up sessions 9 that I ran last week, alongside the in-class time that they had as well. So we definitely make sure that the community as a whole, kids have access to this in a really equitable way. They have as much time as necessary to complete it. If they need to come back to the testing, they absolutely can. And that if kids have been on a sports trip, if they have been ill, if they have whatever, we will make sure that they have the opportunity to complete. So that, again, some parents in the room, you might not have received a complete report. That's because your kid probably still has something to finish, and they will do that with me today, or potentially on Monday of next week. Okay? Any additional questions for the good of the group?
5 years of the kid in the same grade. Is it correct? From what I
Yes, the
understood?
percentile.
The
is what you mean?
percentiles.
Percentile, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not the results of the kids this year, but like
No.
in the past 5 years and somehow.
When they had that whole group of 10 million
Okay.
kids do it, they use that as a normed study, right? So
Yeah.
that's the group they build all the data
Yeah.
off, and they'll do that again now.
2025, the next set will come. So
Yeah.
it's every 5 years. I had another question right at the back there, I think. Hi.
Yes, just wanted to check, is it true that universities are interested in looking at the map for kids? And is that some or all, and do you kind of provide that support towards the sort of the higher years at IDD to kind of see what's the best way to present that, or I'm just kind of...
So MAP is one additional mechanism of learning and evidencing learning. Universities that I've had access to do not ask ever for MAP data, but for example, if you're at a very competitive interview and you can say, hey, listen, just so you know, like this is an additional thing that evidences my learning, that can always be useful, but they don't ask for it directly. I'm not sure if there's a privacy component that they're not allowed to do that, because there's different mechanisms for how testing works, and I don't think they can actually do that.
They don't.
They don't.
I've never
I've never heard of it, ever. Yeah. Sorry, we had a question here. Hi.
One more question. Do I understand right that you said that kids had different questions?
Yes.
In the
Yes.
grade? And who was the person who chose which level of questions?
The computer. So what happens is everybody starts with the same question, and then based off how they do that question, it gives them another question, and then a different one. Everybody has the same start. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And then it differentiates. Yeah.
At grade level. So we put in that your child is at grade 3, it's a sort of a starting point for grade 3, and then it goes.
I'm not sure about the first question, if everybody have the same, or somebody like teacher or somebody choose which level, that was the question.
I think it's based on the grade level that we put in, based on this normal data set.
Question at the back. Hi.
Yes, I have a question regarding the main goal of this test. You told us that the main goal is to support your child and estimate the growth. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we will take the second test only in May, how we can correct the situation? So we have initial test only in November, beginning. So the second test only on May. And to estimate the growth, I think that it's too late. Because how you can support your child, how you can estimate this growth in the end of the year.
To do to help them do the growth. We can of course only measure the growth when we get to the end and do the second test. But each time we get all this information on what we can do to support them, which of course we will do.
Yeah.
So this test has already given us all of this information. I think we showed some slides of the type of information that comes up that we can then give to teachers to support. And also, the teachers at a grade level can see maybe, oh, we need to do more work as a grade on something. In fact, if that's a grade level.
But it's only one of our assessments, right? Because between now and May, we're doing further reading tests inside the class. We're doing math assessments that go along with our units. Like, we have our set ISP continuum of curriculum that we are constantly teaching towards and assessing. That's the inward-facing assessment data we have. This is an external assessment, so that's why we have the whole mix of all of that to be able to get different understandings of the child. So the in-between time, we're comparing their first assessment with how does that relate to their first reading assessment that they took and their math assessments in their units, right? We're developing plans and action plans to support kids. So working with them that are in alignment with what their needs were. And then we'll take another iteration in May to see how are they doing in comparison to that, right? Externally speaking. But we're constantly always teaching towards and assessing the curriculum that we have. And that's our most important information that is in alignment with the curriculum that we've developed. This is another data point that just helps us triangulate or confirm how is that in relation to what they're doing inside the classroom. So it's both things.
So are there any additional questions for the good of the group? Certainly.
Just out of curiosity, so how is this related to the PISA test? It's covering areas for the...
To the what, sorry?
PISA. Yeah, which ISA was part of, right?
Yeah.
So you get the PISA results from ISA as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not related to the PISA test is the simple answer. The color coding that they use is actually very common across different things of looking at data, but it's not related. There's no relation to PISA. Yeah.
So ISP participated in PISA?
No.
No. No.
No. Again, PISA is just one additional data set, and MAP provides so many benefits for us in terms of its usage. That is the data set that we have chosen to move forward with. Okay?
We will stay here right now afterwards for any individual questions that
Yeah, I
you
know
might
you
want
need
to
to
ask that you didn't want to ask in front of the group. Not about individual kids, but about that you might want to ask not in front of the group. But I do want to thank both of you for giving a great presentation. It's a difficult topic.